What's up, you guys? Nick here. So I know it's been a while since I posted a video, but this is actually something I've been wanting to talk about for a while, but for whatever reason, I just kind of kept putting it off. Um, so what I'm thinking is that this is going to be effectively a two-part video. Um, Part one being why I work as much as I do, and then part two being how I work as much as I do. And in both of these cases, I'm gonna make a separate point of how I do now versus how I did a couple years ago, because I've worked a very similar amount of hours for the past 3 or 4 years, but it was under very different environments depending on when it happened. So I kind of just want to separate those out. That way, I'm not just giving you the singular perspective of this one set of jobs that I have at this time. So, with all that being said, why do I work 90 plus hours a week? The simple answer is because I can. I know that sounds ridiculous and silly. The fact of the matter is that I am 22 years old. I am still young. I'm still in relatively good health. But much more importantly, I am able to put forth that much effort and time and restrict and limit my free time outside of work without necessarily feeling negative effects. I'm not going to feel the sleep deprivation effects that I may feel later. Um, I'm not going to feel some of the degradation of my physical state effects that I very likely will be feeling in my 30s, 40s, and onwards, especially considering I have very severe arthritis. I have a very short time period that I can work these kinds of hours. Additionally, I work this many hours because I know I won't want to later. And my one of my biggest fears is that if I don't do it now, I may set myself up to where I have no choice but to do so in the future. Um, and I'm obviously by no means saying that in my 30s I will be old. I am not so ignorant to think that that is, my body will be falling apart. However, I probably won't be in as great of health as I am now. And the further I push that time horizon forward, the more that that's going to be the case. Right now, I'm 22 years old. I have every single benefit of compound interest that I could have, for the most part. So I don't see a reason to limit myself to, let's say, 40 or 50 hours a week, which I think are much more normal amounts for people to work. Um, with all that being said, are there things I don't like about working this much? Absolutely. For the most part, it's not what most people would dislike. A lot of people would miss the social life. For lack of a better way to put it, I don't have much of a social life, anyways. I have very many online friends that I speak to on a very regular basis, but simply due to the nature of being online, there's much less of a constraint built around time of day or what location I may be at or how busy I may be, because it's much more easy to fit that into limited time constraints versus an in-person relationship. I can only do so much with what free time I have, and I have to actively dedicate free time to those interactions. It's probably been about 4 years, if not longer, since I've had what I would call a very active social life, and I'm okay with that. I don't, regret it. I don't miss it. I don't miss, my high school social life and all of that. It was very great. Don't get me wrong, but what I'm doing now is worth so much more to me than something as minor as that, especially because this time I'm working now, I'm hopefully buying years of my life later that I'll be able to do all those things completely unencumbered. I won't have to worry about my work schedule. I won't have to worry about, can I afford to do this thing? I won't have to worry about, can they afford to do this thing? I can, help them out, help them afford things. If I want to take a trip with some friends and they can't afford it necessarily, I can help foot that bill. Versus at 22 years old, I make good money for my education level, but that's about all I could really say. I wouldn't be able to, self fund a trip for a few people or anything like that. Um, but beyond that, um, the biggest regret that I have as far as my work schedule is that I'm not working just one job. Whenever you work just one job and you're working the amount of hours that I am, you have the benefit of a very excessive amount of overtime. When I was younger, there were some time periods where I was making significantly more money than I even knew what to do with, especially because this was before I knew much about personal finance. But it was because I was working 80 to 100 hour weeks pretty consistently all for the same company. So when you're working 40 hours, let's say you're making 10 an hour. 40 hours, $400, let's just assume there's no taxes, right? Work 40 more hours. If you're at a typical company, typical overtime, time and a half, then you effectively just worked 60 more hours. So that extra 40 became 60. Whereas if I was working between two different companies, as I am now, I'm still getting overtime, but it's very limited amounts. I'm working 90 to 100 hours a week, and I'll typically pull in between 10 and 20 hours of overtime. A little frustrating. However, I get paid very well, and this job that I have is the epitome of easy. So I'm not going to bite the hand that feeds, I'm not going to go and try to avoid it or, complain about the fantastic situation that I'm in. So when I was younger and I worked hours like this, I made it work back then because there were things that I wanted. My whole life, I grew up not poor, but most certainly not well off. If you took a look at my father's salary, you might think that we were well off. He made very good money, typically in the high, $80,000 to $90,000 range. However, he wasn't good with money. He didn't know how to spend it. He could save pretty well, but that's about it. And he spent massive amounts of all of his paychecks on alcohol, on cigarettes, on all that kind of stuff. So even though the paychecks were coming in for him, not that much of it really got reflected in our household budgets. And that was my whole life growing up. I had to drop out of band my senior year because of it. We had constant funding issues throughout high school because of it. And I did not want to have to experience that anymore. I kind of had that very unfortunate pendulum swing you often see people have where they grow up poor and then they attempt to live too excessively afterwards, trying to make up for that lost time effectively. Mine was certainly mitigated to a large extent because I didn't grow up poor, and I also had enough wherewithal to know that I shouldn't overstep myself too much. But I still made mistakes. But working that many hours allowed me to make those mistakes, and they weren't crippling. If I had been working just 40 hours a week every week, and that's it, and I made those mistakes, it would have crippled me for years and years and years, and I can absolutely guarantee that. And I'm very thankful I worked those hours that I did. Thankfully, the security industry is very good for that. They very often just need warm bodies, so if you're willing to do even that, or potentially a little bit more, there's typically a lot of hours to pick up, at least in the greater Houston area. When it comes to now, the reason that I work as many hours as I do is because I'm investing, I'm saving, I'm trying to buy myself years in the future because I'm trying to retire in my 30s ideally. And I cannot do that if I'm not making a large excess of money right now. Sure, if I worked 40, 50 hours a week, I'd pay my bills just fine. I'd be moderately comfortable. But that's not the point. I don't want to live a moderately comfortable life for 40 or 50 years. I want to work extremely hard now because I love working anyways. And once I'm done, I get to be done. And that's huge to me. Additionally, now that I have my daughter, she's a huge motivator for that. My parents weren't active in my upbringing. I had a single dad. My mom lived out of state. I didn't get to have a lot of moments and experiences with them. I never want my daughter to look back at her childhood and think that for a single second. I want her to look back and remember all the good times that we had. And I want her to have to think back and remember that extracurricular she couldn't do because I didn't have enough money for it. I couldn't afford it. It wasn't in the budget this month. I'm trying to set us up to have a very happy life together. And I'll be the first to say, I'm not saving exceptionally, I've made the joke before. I'm no Graham Stephan. I'm still going to spend things, or I'm going to spend for things that, I don't necessarily need. One day I may get a Tesla solar roof just for the security of knowing that in my area, if the grid ever goes out, I have some power for a while, I might end up buying a Tesla. Who knows if that will make sense financially? We'll have to see. But I'm still going to spend money on the things that I care about. But by working as many hours as I do, I can afford to spend that money on these things I care about. And I'm not giving up a bunch of other things in return. And that's very big for me. The more that I can limit living a life of scarcity, instead can just, live a life of, I can afford this. It doesn't get in the way of my goals. So let's do it. The better, especially now that I'm moving into a situation where my fiance stay at home She won't be making money necessarily, at least for the current time frame. So I need to be thinking about paying our bills and investing now, saving money for future investment properties now. And that to me is a lot more valuable than having just a little more rest time. Because at the end of the day, I'll be fully blunt, I still get about 60 to 70 hours of free time a week. I don't need more than that. I don't. I can certainly exist with it. It's difficult for me to find things to fill the time. I will very often end up just scrolling through, television channels and stuff because I don't have that many things to do. I can fill 30 to 40 hours easily on the fun things I like to do and going to the gym and all of that, but it reaches a point to me where I don't need the free time, and so I don't see a reason to limit myself in order to take said free time. And I'll get a little bit more into that with the whole how I work as many hours as I do. But I wanted to go a bit into the why, because a lot of my friends have asked this of me, because I work 90-ish hours a week, and I go to a trade school for an apprenticeship that I'm doing, and I go to regular college. So, most of my time is accounted for in some way or another. Granted, with the security stuff, I have a lot of leeway with those things, and I'll get into that again later on. But with all that being said, I love what I do. I love the work that I do. I love the amount that I work. I wouldn't trade this situation for most anything. I'd trade it for a lottery win, obviously, but I love what I'm doing. I love where I'm at. And while I understand that for a lot of people, living the way that I do would be absolutely miserable, I really enjoy it. I enjoy working the amount that I do. I enjoy doing the work that I do. And I like knowing that I don't have to worry about, will food be on the table? Will we have to, cut back on the food? Will we have to cut back on X, Y, or Z? If my jeans rip, I can just buy new jeans. Things like that are really valuable to me. That security that comes from all of this. So once again, with all that being said, thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions for me, I would love to answer them. I know a lot of my friends tend to ask me a lot of questions because they're not workaholics like I am. And so it's a perspective they're not used to. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please do leave a like. If you have any suggestions or anything, leave a comment. If you really like the video and you want to subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. But just thanks so much for being here, and I hope that you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.